Hey y'all, hi. First things first, the rug has arrived and it's on the floor. So now you can get a much better sense of what the space is going to look like, and you still have time to revise your votes about paint color. You have all been so delightful in the comments voting for the paint colors. I just can't even tell you. You know that feeling when you're looking at something, reading something, or like watching a silly video on the internet and your stomach is just like filled with giggles, like bubbles of giggle, like butterflies inside bubbles. That's how it has made me feel to read through all of your comments on the last video about which color I should paint the wall. I just love you all so much. And I've laughed out loud several times, and it's just been absolutely delightful. I'll timestamp the beginning of the video if you don't care about paint colors and you just want to skip right to it. Duping the vibes of the Patrick Ta Major Dimension 2 palette. Duping the vibes. How about I'll just tell you what the video is about and then I'll go back to the paint colors. So duping the vibes is a term that I coined years ago. I think it was during my no-buy year to talk about not duping a palette. I think duping a palette has been popular on YouTube for a long time. Taking single eyeshadows and like making your own of an eyeshadow palette, trying to match exactly every single color in the palette. Duping the vibes is different because I often feel like you don't have to already own every single color that's in a palette in order to do on your eyes everything that you would do if you had that palette. And I find that I can learn a lot about what my relationship would be with an eyeshadow palette that I haven't bought by looking at a picture of it, pretending that it's here, and then asking myself what I would do if I had it, and then approximating what I would do if I had it with eyeshadows that I already have, even if they're not exact color or texture dupes for the palette that I'm looking at. In theory, duping the vibes is a way to find out that you do want to buy an eyeshadow palette, because if you're trying to do what you would do if you had the palette and you're stymied at every turn, you don't have anything close to the blue that's in there, you don't have a murky green, and that's why you want the palette. Duping the vibes could teach you that it actually is unique to your collection in practice and not just in theory. But I, as someone who has a modest collection of single eyeshadows and eyeshadow palettes, I almost always, if not always, find that when I'm drawn to an eyeshadow palette that's new to the market, I already have what I need to do everything that I would do with that palette if I owned it. And when I duped the vibes today of the Patrick Ta Major Dimension 2 palette, spoiler alert, that's pretty much what I learned. But I learned a lot of other stuff about why I like the palette. There are nuances to my attraction to it. You'll get to see me create this eye look, this majorly dimensional eye look on my eyes using my eyeshadow palette collection, if you keep watching the video. I feel like that sentence might have gotten a little unhinged halfway through. Anyway, that's what the video is. If you just want to skip right to me applying this eye makeup, then click the timestamp at the top of the description box. If you want to know about the paint colors, here we go. Setting plaster is out. Very few of you picked it, and I agree. I feel like it looks much more yellow under these lights than I was expecting it to. It's out. Sulking Room Pink and Dead Salmon are neck and neck in the voting. I mean, y'all are passionate. I thought it was going to be Dead Salmon, and it may yet be Dead Salmon. I feel an emotional reaction to Sulking Room Pink, and a lot of you did too. It makes me feel feelings, and a lot of you said the same thing. This color makes you feel feelings. I feel that same way too, but the strongest argument against Sulking Room Pink that many of you have made in the comments is that it might affect the visual perception of makeup, because a lot of makeup has these tones in it. And that's actually the main thing that concerns me about it, and many of you brought up that concern as well. The strongest argument against Dead Salmon that a lot of you were making was that it was too similar to the color of the floor. But as you can see, the color of the floor is not a factor. However, with the room being much lightened and brightened by this cream-colored rug, perhaps we feel like Sulking Room Pink is more viable because maybe it won't affect the color perception as much. I'm holding up this grubby washcloth to cover up Sulking Room Pink and give you a sense of what Dead Salmon alone looks like. And there's what Sulking Room Pink looks like without dead salmon in the picture. I'm going to give it another day or two, and then I'm going to decide. So let me know what you think, if your opinion has changed now that the rug is here. And also there will be more things in the background, a few more things. But now that the rug, I don't know, the rug has really tied the room together, as they say. If this is your first time to my channel, then welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for bearing with me through this long, meandering introduction, a little dose of old school HLP. My name is Hannah. I love makeup, and I do reviews of new palettes and new products from time to time, but I really like to use my makeup, and I find that if I have too much, it's hard for me to get real use out of any one thing. So when there's something new to the market that really attracts me, a lot of times I do first what I'm doing in this video, which is to turn to the makeup that I already own and see if it will suffice. If that sounds good to you, if you enjoy this while you're watching, please subscribe to my channel. And now let's go ahead and get into the meat of the video. Okay, I've zoomed you in a little bit so that you can see what I'm doing on my eyes, but not so close that you won't be able to see whole palettes when I'm holding them up and making choices about which shadows to use. So the first step with this kind of practical, hands-on duping the vibes project is to get a really good, big, kind of close-up image of the palette in question. I've been dazzled by the marketing imagery of this Patrick Ta palette, but for this video, I pulled up for myself just like a straight product photography picture, like the picture that's on the listing for the sale of the palette on Sephora and on the Patrick Ta website. I've pulled it up on my computer screen, I've made it as big as I could get it, and there's nothing around it. There's no lighting to make it look more glamorous, there's no background imagery. It's just the palette. So it's the closest thing that I can get to having the palette in my hands by itself, just like in isolation, opening it up and looking at it and saying to myself, okay, which eyeshadow am I going to use first? So I'm looking at the image and I'm saying to myself, which eyeshadow am I going to use first? And right away, the experience of wanting the palette is changing, because instead of just being dazzled by the marketing imagery and kind of like the color story as a whole, the excitement, the warmth, the texture of it, I've moved into this space of practical application. So it's like I've moved out of fantasy and into reality. Even though I don't have the actual palette, I'm just asking myself a specific question about the palette. Which shadow am I going to use first? Right away, of course, I'm drawn to the top row. I do like matte shadows, and I actually really like all matte looks. But when I first open a palette and I ask myself which shadow am I going to use, it's never a matte. It's always something that has some dimension and shine. The three pale, like champagne-y, pinky shades that are in the dimensional, the textured formula, I can see myself using those as accent shades, but I know from experience that putting shades that pale all over my lid doesn't bring me that much satisfaction. And the deeper, kind of really, really wine-colored, crushy, creamy shade, that's beautiful. That's the kind of shadow that I really love. But it's more of like an outer corner deepening shade or a smudging along the lash line shade, not really an all over the lid shadow. I've learned just in these first moments with this project that there's actually only one statement, look defining, kind of like look grounding or look rooting shadow for me. There's actually just one. And if you had quizzed me on it without me having a picture of the palette before me, I would have been like, oh, there are like a whole bunch of eyeshadows in this palette that I could use in a whole bunch of different ways. But asking myself this question, which eyeshadow am I going to use first? To me, with my habits and with my preferences, there's kind of only one. So I'm going to go through my eyeshadows and find the closest dupe that I can to this kind of like rich, creamy, slightly dimensional cranberry metallic eyeshadow. Okay, I found one. And I actually had this in mind. I love this eyeshadow, and so even though it's a single and it's floating around among all of my other singles, I remember it. It's in my Makeup Mind Palace. It is from a Juvia's Place palette originally. Years ago, my friend Angelica Nyqvist, who, as you probably know, also has a YouTube channel, sent me a couple of Juvia's Place palettes as gifts, and I depotted them, and I just kept the shadows that I really, really loved, which were a lot of them. So I have a number of these floating around in my singles. And this might actually be my favorite one. I believe that the shade name in the Juvia's Place palette is Nomad, and I'm not exactly sure which palette it's from, but I will find out and I'll link it down below. Curiously, I think that the fact that I really love this eyeshadow, have used it a lot, have history with it, might be part of why I am so attracted to the Patrick Ta palette, because I have a positive association with metallic dimensional eyeshadows like this. And there is one that features heavily in the Patrick Ta palette. So I feel like I'm kind of reverse engineering my attraction to the palette. I'm realizing that I'm attracted to it because I like the thing that I already have that's similar to it. I'm going to start by putting this all over both of my lids. Not all over, but I'm going to cover a lot of surface area on both of my lids, first with my finger and then blending out with a brush. I'm starting with this Rephr 14 brush. I find that it's fluffy enough to get a soft blend, but small enough to apply shadow in a targeted way if I want to. On my lower lash line, I'm going to use the Rephr 03. So there's the base of the look laid down just with that one Juvia's Place shadow. If I were keeping it simple today, I could just put on a little bit of eyeliner and mascara and this would be it. I mean, this could definitely be a complete look, but I want to simulate a more intense using of this palette, so I'm going to add some more colors on my eyes. I do think that this color is probably a bit more of a fiery red, like almost an orange red, than the one shadow, which is like a really pure true cranberry in the Patrick Ta palette. But I feel like there are a lot of other things about this shadow that correlate with what I expect I would get from using the Patrick Ta eyeshadow, namely its dimensionality. So this isn't just like a straight metallic. It has different colors mixed in. There's sort of like a slightly iridescent gold. There's some shifting, like the main color pigment kind of shifts to gold, and then the gold itself kind of shifts between shades of gold. So I feel like I was really getting the experience of putting an eyeshadow that has like a kind of chameleon quality in a rich rosy or a rich red shade on my eyes. And because I'm duping the vibes, not trying to dupe the palette or the exact look, but kind of the experience, I feel like there's enough correlating. It's definitely enough for me, and I'm feeling a sense of satisfaction and kinship with the color story with what I've done so far. But I think that for my next step, I'm going to try to push the eye look a little bit more into that kind of wine cranberry direction. So I think the next thing I would do if I had this palette in front of me is that I would use either the darkest matte eyeshadow or the darkest metallic eyeshadow, both of which are like rich cranberry wine colors, to add dimension to this look, to deepen up the outer corner and make it smokier. So I'm going to go through my collection and find some shadows that I can use to do the same thing to the same effect. Okay, there are kind of a lot of options because I really like this kind of color, and a number of them are actually in this palette. The last time I built my own palette with the overhead camera, I built this palette, and that was back when I was in LA, and I used it a lot there, and then I shipped it in the moving boxes, and then since I unpacked them, I've been using it a lot here. I really like this little custom palette that I made. And actually the Juvia's Place shadow that I used was in it. It's right there. And I think that for the next step, I'm going to play with these two eyeshadows. So the little square one is from the Viseart Petite Pro Une, and the little round one is from the ColourPop It's a Mood Mega Palette. The Viseart shadow might be a little bit more brown than the Patrick Ta, and I think that this shadow from It's a Mood might be a little bit lighter, like just a little bit more of a cranberry and less of like a burnt cranberry than the one from Patrick Ta. And together, I think that will get where we want to go. And then there is the trusty Viseart Dark Mattes palette, which has in it this shade right here, which actually looks like a pretty good corollary. So I have these palettes open in front of me, and I'm just going to play, deepening up the outer corner, building on what I have so far. And I'm going to kind of go by instinct, and then I'll check in with you and let you know what I actually ended up using the most. I like to lay down color with a teeny tiny pencil brush for this kind of work because I'm able to put it right where I want it to go, and then I can use something a bit fluffier to blend it out. Okay, I think think that that completes the next step for me. Here's what I did. I know that this is like that moment when the eye look looks a little bit whacked and hasn't come together yet. I hope will come together. I started with the mix of the two shadows from my little custom palette. I dipped into the brown, the Viseart brown, and I put that in the outer corner on both eyes. And then I dipped into the ColourPop kind of burgundy and I layered it right on top. So I essentially mixed them together. And then I also used the pencil brush to define my lower lash line with them. And I put the mix of those two, mostly the brown, actually into my waterline in lieu of an eyeliner in the waterline. But then, even though the look had been kind of defined, I wanted to bring it back into that really like wine, almost deep rose side of the spectrum of these colors. I felt like it was still really kind of in the orangey red or fire red realm. So I went into this Viseart Dark Mattes shade right here, which is definitely more of a deep rosy burgundy than like a neutral burgundy. And I used it sort of softly all over the lid just to veil the eye look with more of that tone that I was looking for. And I also pushed it into the outer corner to define the look even more. And I do think that I've brought the look back into kind of like a deep rosy red space. Now comes to me the fun part. And I think the reason that I like palettes like this that do have a bunch of sort of sparkly washes of light colors, even though I'm not prone to put those all over my lid. I don't want to ground a look with them. I find them useful for finishing a look and making it softer, more diffused, and in a way more exciting. So if I had this palette and I was working from here, the next thing that I would do would be to play with the 3 champagne-y pinky sparkly shades. I would use my fingers to dab them into the inner corner and drag that sparkle and that brightness across the lid. I would also use them on a brush, 1, 2, or all 3 of them, up underneath my brows to soften this line and kind of fill this space with a blending, shiny, light reflecting shade. Also all around the edges, probably the palest one, the champagne one, the one that's closest to my skin color, I would put out here. And I might even buff some of that shine along the lower lash line. So I'm going to go through my collection and look for the shadows that I have that I can use to do those same things. I know that there are going to be a bunch of options because I love this kind of thing, and then I'll proceed to do that. Okay, I'm looking through all of my palettes and palettes of single eyeshadows, and the options are just piling up. I feel like I just need to stop and show you what I have and use what I have. So the first thing that sprung to mind that was like in my Makeup Mind palettes that I thought of as soon as I looked at this picture of this palette is Clionadh Blaze. This is one of the glitter multichromes from Clionadh. It's incredibly dimensional, and it's shifting from like a peachy, pinky champagne to a dimensional gold. So I feel like it simulates not just the color, but also the dimensionality that's promised by the part of this palette that I'm looking at right now. I could probably do everything that I was talking about doing with this, but I like the idea of using a bunch of different versions of this kind of thing because I think I would be moving among like all 3 of those lighter shades in the top row if I had this palette. This shade right here in the Odin's Eye palette that Angie created, it's called Hellfire. I feel like it's a really good shiny option for the brow bone and maybe around the edges. There are actually a bunch of options in this part of the half-empty ColourPop It's a Mood palette. All of these shades, I popped them out, and I think that some of them are in my custom palette and some of them are just kicking around. But let's watch Reunion, this like soft peachy gold. I also grabbed my Pat McGrath Mothership palette. You know, I really, really love this super shiny wet look shade for this kind of task. But I also feel like Moon Glow Skin Show, is that what that's called? I think so. This one is also really, really useful for this kind of task. I think I may have just done some terrible out of focus swatching. So the top one is Clionadh Blaze. The second one down right here is Reunion from Angie's palette. Oh no, Hellfire from Angie's palette. The third one down is Reunion from the ColourPop palette. And then the really sparkly one at the bottom is the Pat McGrath. I don't know how well you'll be able to see those, but I think you'll be able to see that they have a lot of dimension and shine. At a glance, it kind of seems like all 4 of them, they're like 4 different versions of just the palest and most peach shade in the Patrick Ta palette. But at least in person, Blaze has a really strong pink reflect. Like it goes so pink when the light hits it from certain angles that I feel like it kind of covers all of the bases of all three of these shades of which I'm trying to dupe the vibes. So I'm just going to go ham with either 2, 3, or 4 of these colors, and then I'll let you know what I did. Okay, this is what has happened. I feel like it's still looking a bit wild, but I do think it is going to come together. Here's what I did. I started with Clionadh Blaze on a finger all over, kind of like all the way from the inner corner up through this part of the, eye socket and kind of halfway across the lid on both eyes. And it is so pink. It's like a rich reflect, and it really made it look more like the look had come from Patrick Ta Major Dimension 2. More even than I think I was expecting it to. It really added that pink. But I kind of ended up scaling it back by layering a bunch of the more champagne beigey reflecting shades. I used Hellfire from Angie's palette all over my brow bone and really like softened the edges of the blend of the deeper shadows and the matte shadows with that. I used Skin Show Moon Glow from the Pat McGrath Midnight Sun palette on the outer part of my brow bone and then all around the edges, again, to kind of like soften and diffuse that blend. And then I went in with the one that I can never put down, the one that I can never stop using and touching, and the name of which is eluding me right now, Supercalifragilistic Fireworks and Sparkles, the House Down Boots. And I tapped that dry, so it's not really like going wild like it can when you mix it with water, but it's really great for like veiling and making everything kind of melt together and shine and look more organic, which is what has happened to it. So I tapped it on the inner corner quite a bit, kind of all over the lids in a soft, diffused way, and even like a little bit up towards the brows right in the center of each lid. I have ended up with an almost finished look for me. Like I really like this as just like the main grungy, smudgy, but sculpted eye. But I think that because I used so many of those softening and glossifying shades, I lost a little bit of the depth and drama and it started to look a little bit muddy. So the last thing that I'm going to do before I put on mascara is to go back into the mattes that I used and define the outer corner a little bit better and maybe even the lower lash line a little bit better. Then I'll add mascara and we'll see what we ended up with. So there's the difference between the kind of redefined eye and the one that I haven't added depth back into yet. I cleaned up a little bit of fallout, partly by brushing it off with a washcloth, but mostly by applying some of the Rose Ink concealer, which is very pigmented, with the Esam T45 brush. This is pretty new to me. I'm just learning how to use it, and I thought I wasn't going to like it because the bristles feel kind of plasticky, but it is so amazing at applying base product. The pointed shape makes it just perfect for like pressing into like the corner of the nose or even under the eye. Like I kind of used it to clean up under my eyes when I was applying the concealer. And there's something about the plasticky bristles. They don't feel as luxe as like the Rephr brushes or the BK Beauty brushes, but there's something about them that makes base product lie down flawlessly. It's like pressing it into the skin with a sponge. It's really, really surprised me. And I'm very grateful that they sent this to me for review because I've been using it a lot. I mean, I just feel like this part of my skin looks really good, and it's because of the way this brush applied the product. So I did that, and then I applied the Ilia Limitless Lash Mascara. I went crazy with it, layering with the long side of the brush to get some bold lashes to help define this look. And this is what we ended up with. I really like it. I love this kind of look, and I do think that these like really reddened rosy tones bring out the green in my kind of like green leaning hazel eyes. I get questions sometimes about how to make green eyes pop or how to make the green in eyes pop. And my best trick is to use the contrasting color, right? The color that's the opposite of green in the color wheel, which is red. I am going to zoom you out a little bit so that I can kind of sit back and you can get a sense of the way that the entire look, like the entire person looks with this eye look on on. And then I'm going to talk about my experience of duping the vibes and my feelings about the Patrick Ta Major Dimension 2 palette now that I've gone through this process. Now that we're zoomed out, I feel like the rest of my face looks a little bit washed out because I'm just wearing clear lip gloss, and I think that wiping off the fallout and applying a little bit of extra concealer faded the color that I had on my cheeks. So I'm just grabbing this because it's close to hand. It's the Ket, it's my little palette of Ket cream products, and I'm just going to apply a little bit of cream blush. While I'm at it, I'm powdering just a little bit with this ColourPop powder. But we're done. Okay, this is the look. I really like the look. I feel like zoomed out, it looks a little bit less sort of intense and I don't know, muddy. You know, I feel like it was looking a little bit watercolory, which I like. You guys know I love that sort of imperfect, smudgy, kind of bleedy look of color and texture on the eyes. But at this distance, I think that it looks a little bit more normal, you know, which I think is good. I like that kind of dimensionality too, right? Something that looks just like a blown out, eye-defining look from a distance, but then you get close in and you're like, it's galaxies. So the look itself, yes, good. I like it. Happy to go about the rest of my day. Happy to film another video in this look. But the question of the hour is the question of the Patrick Ta palette, whether I feel like I've really duped the vibes and how I feel about the palette now. Do I feel like I've successfully duped the vibes? Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. I'm looking at the image of the palette on my computer screen. I'm looking at my eyes in the mirror. If I showed you this look and I was like, I purchased the Patrick Ta Major Dimension 2 palette and I made this eye look with it, nobody would question that. This definitely looks like an eye look that one would do, particularly like an eye look that I would do with this palette. And you know, that does tell me that I would like this palette. But I kind of knew that already, right? That's why I wanted it. That's why I sat down to make this video. I really like what it has to offer. I like the color story for me, and I like playing with texture in the ways that it is offering. Of course, I didn't use cream shadows on my eyes. This palette has those two little cream shadows in it, which are very intriguing. But I also, when I was looking at it and I was thinking to myself, if I had this in my hands, what would I do? I didn't really feel drawn to them. I didn't feel like I would go for them right away. And there are a couple of other interesting things that I found out about myself and my desire for this palette when I was going through this process. The first one, which I spoke about as it was happening, is that when it comes to a starting shade, like a grounding shade, a kicking off the look shade, there's only really one that serves that purpose for me. It's that kind of golden cranberry. So I feel like I would end up with a version of this look every single time I used this palette. I feel like I would always do exactly what I did today. And right away, that tells me that it's not as versatile a palette as I maybe would have thought for me specifically with my tastes and my habits. And I don't know if I could have really learned that unless I had gone through the active process of duping the vibes. I also learned that while I really like the three pale, sparkly dimensional shades in the upper right-hand corner of the palette, like the three rightmost shades in the top row. Even though I really like that kind of thing, to me, they kind of all serve the same purpose. And in a way, they're so close in color or they're so similar in function for me, they sort of all bleed together. And when I go into my actual collection and find eyeshadows that serve that purpose, rather than into this palette, there's more of a spectrum of texture and dimension. This wild eyeshadow from my Pat McGrath palette, Cleona Blaze, which is definitely more multi-chromatic and more dimensional than the shades in the Patrick Ta palette, Skin Show Moon Glow, which I think is probably a softer and more blending into my skin shade than any of the ones in the Patrick Ta palette, the ones in the ColourPop palette, the one in Angie's palette, which was really shiny and I really loved the way it went on, and then a whole bunch that I know that I have that I didn't even pull for this video, the Topper and the Tom Ford duo, the Naked Bronze Cream and Powder Powder, Natasha Denona Cava, Natasha Denona Sparks, all of my liquid eyeshadows that serve this kind of purpose, like Lethal Bandwidth, even the Lisa Eldridge Liquid Lurex that I have. The thing that that part of the palette offers to me, I can go further with it and do it more to my satisfaction using the array of eyeshadows for that purpose that I already have. I love a palette that has a really deep brownish cranberry instead of a brown or a black. That's one of the things I really like about this palette. As I learned as soon as I started looking, I have so many deep browns, brownish cranberries, and I actually kind of had a really exciting array of choices, and I was able to move the eye look in subtly in like one color direction or another color direction based on which ones I was choosing for that purpose, deepening up the outer corner, kind of like grounding the look in a deep color. And possibly the nail in the coffin of this palette, all 4 of the other mattes on the bottom row, all of the mattes except for the darkest one, I completely ignored, didn't even notice they were there, had no desire to use them, and probably wouldn't, even if I owned this palette. And that's almost half the palette. Actually, the group of shades that I didn't really want to use includes the 2 creams and the 4 mattes. That's half the palette. I still think that this is an incredibly beautiful palette. And if I didn't have the array of eyeshadows that I have, if I didn't have the ability to dupe the vibes, or if I was just a 1 palette person or a 1 or 2 palette person, and I had used up one of my eyeshadow palettes recently, and I really loved this kind of eye look the way that I do, I could see myself buying it. I think it's a great option. I've heard the formula is wonderful. I really like the brand. It's very luxe. It's really exciting. I like the fact that dimension is what's on the table and that there's all of this texture in this palette. It's a testament to what a great palette it is that I have so many of the components of the palette already in my collection. Because I have a curated collection, I only keep things that I really like. In a way, and again, we're kind of like reverse engineering, this palette is built of stuff that I really like. And I think that speaks to it being a well-built palette. But what that means for me is that I don't need to buy it. And I could have told you that if I had really just talked through it, but I know it now today on a much more fundamental level. Going into this video, I would say I still really wanted this palette, and now I actually genuinely don't want it anymore because it feels like it would be redundant to me. And I actually feel right now as though even if I had the palette, when I wanted to make an eye look like this, I would probably do what I actually did do today. I would end up reaching for these other little bits and bobs that I have collected because I find them individually so exciting and gratifying to use. And because I like getting my fingers into them. And I like making use of them. I like making use of my special makeup that I've painstakingly collected, that I've owned for a long time, and that I'll continue to own and use. So I hope that this has inspired you to shop your own stash. I hope that this has taught you to dupe the vibes in practice. If it's something that you've heard me talking about, but you didn't quite get, or if you've only seen the overhead videos where I'm doing it by building a palette, but maybe you don't have single eyeshadows, so you can't dupe the vibes of a full palette in that exact way. This is really the most straightforward and possibly the most effective way to do it. Duping the vibes just right onto your eyes rather than into a separate magnetic palette. If you do dupe the vibes of something that you've been wanting, let me know in the comments how it goes. I really appreciate you for being here. Just a quick reminder to subscribe if you are not subscribed. As of this filming, we're pretty close to 60,000, which is kind of a thrilling benchmark for me personally. I think that there's part of me that hoped that I might get to 50,000, but never thought that I would ever get to 60,000. So if you are one of the many people who watches my videos without being subscribed, maybe this is your moment. Just putting it out there. But no matter what you choose to do, please don't forget to take extra good care of yourself so that you can be the most effective version of yourself as you do your work in the world.